Hello there, my name is Luciano Oliveira. I am a Brazilian attorney. I'm here in Rio de Janeiro, and today we're going to be talking about due diligence in Rio de Janeiro real estate transactions for foreign citizens. It's worthy to mention that due diligence in Brazil acquires another dimension for two reasons. The first one, there is no title insurance in Brazil, which means if you buy a bad title property, you are on your own. If you are in the US, you buy a bad title property, which means there is a problem with the deed, or if there is a problem with the chain of ownership, someone is gonna pay you for the money lost. That's why it's called insurance. In Brazil, there is no such thing. So you either do a very good due diligence, or if you bought a bad title property, nobody is gonna come to help you. The only resource is gonna be to sue the seller, and good luck getting something back. The other issue is there is no escrow account. In Brazil, you pay the seller first, and then you hope that the seller is going to attend the closing. For Brazilians, this is less concerning because usually you're going to pay the balance through a local wire transfer, and parties are going to go to the closing. They arrive at the closing location in a place called cartório, which roughly translates as a registry. And once the buyers see the sellers in the room and the cartório officer sees the sellers in the room, the buyer is going to transfer the money to the seller. But notice that at this point in time, parties are in the registry, right? It's difficult for the seller to change his mind. However, this type of payment is impossible for a foreign citizen because a foreign citizen is going to have the funds in their countries of origin, and you cannot get a wire done instantaneously to Brazil. Actually, when you send your money from your bank abroad to Brazil, there's going to be a whole compliance process that the bank is going to run before releasing the funds into the seller's account. There are no international check, so you cannot issue a check from your country. And as a foreign citizen, unless you are a legal resident in Brazil, you cannot open a bank account in Brazil. That's a very common question we hear. Oh, can I just open a bank account in there? I transfer the funds to myself and then I pay the seller locally, and I don't have the issue in terms of time gap between paying and the closing. So that doesn't work as well. The solution we use here at the firm is we use a currency exchange bank, a partner who's going to receive the funds, and they are going to handle the exchange upfront. They are going to keep the currency in reais, and when we get to the day of the closing, we're going to play by ear. And once we know that the sellers are going to the closing, we call the bank and we say, all right, you can go ahead and release the funds. That's a kind of poor man's escrow, right? It's not an actual escrow, but it is a way to make up for the lack of escrow. So all of that, this is just an introduction to explain why due diligence is especially important in Brazil. So due diligence, what types of things are going to be reviewed in a comprehensive due diligence? The due diligence is going to be done on the property. So you want to know if taxes are paid. You want to know if there is litigation attached to the property itself, and you want to know if there is any thing concerning about the property from a regulation, from an environment, and from other perspectives. There is also the need for the due diligence on the seller, because in Brazil, very important for you to understand, in addition to the lack of title insurance, it's also possible, even after the closing, even after the deed is issued on your name, it's possible for creditors of the seller to come after the property. So we just had a closing here in Rio de Janeiro a few days ago, where the seller she had not signed the transfer deed. So she bought the property, she signed the contract, but she never recorded the transfer deed because she owed monies to creditors, right? So she avoided recording the property so the creditors would not know that she had the property. And then once it was time for the transaction, she actually recorded like a few days before the closing. So there was a way of avoiding the creditors to come after the property. However, the problem with that type of transaction is that the creditors, if they realize she was hiding the property, they can file a lawsuit and go after the property. There are going to be buyers for such problematic properties, but there is going to be a deep discount on the property because you are basically running the risk that someone is going to sue you in the future, right? So there are buyers for all types of properties. In our firm, like, we recommend you to avoid those properties, but it's always up to the client to make the final decision in terms of which property they want to buy. So going back to the due diligence on the seller, the government wants to know that the seller doesn't owe money to the municipality, doesn't owe taxes to the state, doesn't owe taxes to the federal government, in addition to labor issues, which could be labor unpaid taxes and also labor litigation. Even if it is like an individual, right? Like, an individual could have a maid and was not paying the taxes, or was not paying all the rights to this maid. And in Brazil, there is a whole industry of labor lawsuits. When you leave a subway, you're going to see a guy with a sign, sue your employer, cost free. So that's pretty terrible, but that's how it is. And it has improved a little bit. Like, recently, there was some updates in terms of legislation to reduce the volume of a lawsuit, of labor lawsuit. But labor lawsuit is part of the Brazilian culture. Whoever is in Brazil, they don't even realize that this is a thing, because they don't know how it works in other legal systems. But in Brazil, labor law, labor litigation, labor rights, it's a universe in itself. It's something out of this world. But this is just to highlight the importance of the due diligence on the labor aspects of the seller as well. Another aspect of the due diligence on the property is going to be the inspection. In some countries like the US, the property inspection is actually a required step in the process of buying a property if you're going to have a mortgage on it. And in Brazil, it's exactly the opposite. Most of the time, transactions are not going to include a property inspection. So that's pretty surprising. Like a foreign citizen, when they are, getting into the contracting stage, they're going to ask, what about the inspection? And then the realtors, they're basically not going to understand what the person is saying, because they don't have this concept of inspection. And then you're going to try to explain, I want to know if the walls, they are sounding, if there are no issues with the ceiling, with the foundation, right? But again, in Brazil, that's not customary. And even for high value or high amount properties, inspections are going to be rare. Of course, we understand that our clients are concerned with the property, particularly when they are paying a lot of money, and we can arrange inspection whenever it's appropriate for a transaction. Property inspections may be actually recommended for properties by the beach, particularly because of the possibility of foundation issues. I'm going to give an example. The state of Ceará, Fortaleza, a city called Aquiraz, and there are high value properties by the beach, and soil over there is kind of unstable. So it's not rare for those properties to have foundation issues. So for all the transactions in the area, we now recommend that our clients actually hire a property inspection. In other areas, maybe if it is by the seacoast, maybe the soil is better, and then there is no need for such inspection, unless it is like a 3-story property, and then the foundation, it may be supporting more weight, and then in this case, it may be recommended as well. Finally, interesting to note that some of those due diligence steps, they are going to be even required for closing. At closing, the cartório, the registry in charge of closing, it's going to require from the parties to present the so-called certidões negativas, which roughly translate as certificates of clearance. And the certificates of clearance, they are going to say the seller doesn't owe money to the municipality, to the state, to the federal government. The property has all taxes paid and other concerns from the government perspective. But it is important for you to understand that this is the bare minimum minimum due diligence. There are many things that could be wrong, but they are not going to be caught by the registry. So does the need for a very thorough due diligence, specifically by a law firm, because a realtor or a real estate agency, there is so much they can do in terms of due diligence. Whenever there is a legal issue involved, they are not going to have the skills and knowledge needed to assess the risks involved. So I hope this was helpful. If you like this video, follow us for more.